So from a psych perspective, what makes workplace bullying different from other forms of bullying? Is it more dangerous?
Dangerous? I mean, we've all heard of stories that make the news, that shows how dangerous it can be if an employee feels disrespected and abused in the workplace, and how they may come to bring aggression in a very physical and direct way against an organization. But I think the other meaning of dangerous you might be alluding to is, how does it affect somebody's self-esteem? What damage is done to the person who's on the receiving end of the experience. I think probably what makes, if I were just to compare it to schoolyard bullying or peer bullying or whatever, school bus, the stories that we hear, is because the workplace is a hierarchy and there's so much at stake. It's more than the relationship that you have with that person who might be seen as the bullier. It's the need that you have to be successful in your own life and all the people to whom you're accountable. It's not just personal between two people. There's just so much more involved. And so if a person is put in what they feel is like a forced choice situation, where on the one hand they need the job, or they think they need the job. And by the way, perception, as you've learned in social psychology, sometimes is more important than reality. And people sometimes act as if they don't have choices, that they're locked into a situation where they have to make it work, when in fact they may not be able to fix it. So, that when you have that kind of picture of the workplace, it makes it very difficult to challenge a boss or some senior member of the workplace, or even a peer who has not created an unfavorable impression on leadership. So you have nobody to validate that your peer is treating you badly, not being fair to you as part of a working team or whatever, because everybody else might see them as perfectly fine. So the danger is partially psychological, because of the high stakes. And I've got to tell you, as a psychologist, when I work with people, one of the most important goals I have is to get people to see that they have choices. Same thing in an abusive marriage. The reason people stay is because their perception of the situation is, I have no other place to go. And I'm not meaning to be facile about the idea that it's easy to get a new job, just walk away. But sometimes the final conclusion, not the first, but the final conclusion might be, is that you're better off walking away from an unworkable situation. You don't make healthy choices if you feel locked in. So in that sense, it's dangerous, to stick with something that's really harmful for your well-being, physical and sometimes physical as well as psychological health.
The next question would be, how do you think millennials will handle workplace bullying differently compared to older generations?
I think the things that really have changed culturally, I certainly see it in my years of being in the workplace, is the presence of social media and all of the cultural shifts that have taken place around it. One of the things that immediately comes to mind is the potential to bully anonymously. You can't do that easily in an era that precedes the one we're in now. If you're going to bully somebody, it might be face to face. And now there's so many means that people have of demeaning others that are much more indirect. We've always had gossiping and rumor mongering, as you were talking about in the workplace, where you can talk about people, talk around them, and in effect damage them and damage their reputation. But I find it troubling, the facility with which the anonymity of online postings, all these stories we're hearing about using Facebook to talk about the workplace, to talk about colleagues or whatever, as if you have the license, to say things on the internet that you never would say face to face. That, I think, is different. And I do think, unfortunately, there's a certain amount of cultural permissiveness around this. You have to forgive me that I'm talking like the olden days, I'm sure it's hard for you to hear this, but you would have been very cautious. The idea of respecting one's boss, is a historical you didn't have to be Bob Cratchit dealing with Scrooge. You didn't have to be one of those guys necessarily, but you'd be very careful about challenging the authority of your supervisor. And I think it's gotten much more lax that way, about people feeling entitled to say whatever comes to mind, whether it's considered good manners or not.
Right.
And if that describes, and I know no generation likes to be seen in pejorative terms, and so maybe what I'm saying doesn't feel fair, but that's a shift that I think exists. I mean, I have experiences with students that I wouldn't have had years ago about the entitlement to say things to you that I never would have ever imagined saying to a professor, but it's become more facile, whatever comes to mind, say it.
Right.
So
we're a lot more expressive. We go against authority a little more. Like, we're kind of known.
Right. It's not that people from the 60s didn't rebel, so to speak, but leveling of the relationship, as opposed to just accepting that you have to earn the seniority, at some point, that you have to work towards it, not walk in the door as a beginner and assume you're going to be entirely equal.
Right.
So, it's a sense of, there are cultures that are more clear about this, about respecting wisdom, experience, or whatever. Now, when a boss bullies, it has nothing to do with wisdom. Okay? Nothing at all. Bullying comes out of insecurity, not out of inner ego strength. So there's no condition under which any boss, any Scrooge, should brutalize a nice guy like Bob Cratchit in the workplace who's doing his best. More savvy about how they stand up for themselves. That might be the good part of it. So they know how to use the system probably more effectively. They, I don't want to call it litigious, but they're more likely to kind of fight back if they're, if they can.
Okay.